So now we've got to get all this power of knowledge and experience and insight in the next 30 minutes. So here we go. I think today is really interesting because we're reflecting on the past and we're looking ahead. We're looking at 30 years of experience. We're looking at 30 years of experience in Ireland in particular, which is interesting for me because so much of my work on leaders started in Ireland, has been there from the start, and it's still there now. So it says something about sustainable approaches. So Ireland's still delivering strongly, has had its challenges, as we know, but you're still working hard. And I'd be really interested to think about what your thoughts and aspirations were back in the day, 30 years ago. What did you dream might have been? I'm sure not all of you are going to be able to answer that, but I think Michael might at least be able to say something. And really, I think we've got to recognise some of us, I won't tar everyone with a brush, but some of us are getting a bit on the grey side. We've been around leader for 30 years now. If it's going to go ahead for another 30 years, then we need a completely new generation of young people, of enabled young people with capacity, with ambitions, with aspiration. So we need to think about, you know, what are they going to be able to do? What are the challenges that face them? You know, how are they going to experiment, learn, and apply those learnings in future? I mean, leader's not an end in itself. Yes, it builds the capacity. Yes, it builds the machine. Yes, it builds that confidence, that social capital and governance that we need. But it's a means to an end also. What are we trying to do? What is it leader in order to? So I'd like you to reflect on that a little bit when I ask you some of these questions. The final thing I think for me is it's interesting to look at this panel and you three people who Maura so eloquently introduced, because you have an interesting common experience with your strong agricultural and rural development background, but also a strong focus on generational renewal, succession, and youth participation. It was mentioned in all the pen picks, all the biographies, and I think that's really important. It reflects my own experience in working in rural development in rural Angus and in the ENRD. And I think, to me, it's one thing that sustains me throughout. My first job out of school was in youth and community work, and then into agriculture, and then into training and so on, and that just stays with me, and that's where the future is. So that to me is where we are. It's where we're looking. We're reflecting and looking to the future. So I would like to know, let's start at the beginning. From what we've seen and what we've heard, what do you think the single leader achievement that really stands out clearly for you in these 30 years? And maybe start with Michael. You've probably got the strongest, dare I say it, the longest perspective on this.
Well, it's time to be proud of the longevity of my involvement, John. Same as yourself. Interesting to hear that you started in the youth and community sector. But in all I've heard today, one of the things that really struck me was Maura starting off so excited about the final yesterday and the Irish sense of place and the Irish sense of community. And Mark complimented that in his presentation because he talked about Kitty O'Shea's pub. He talked about people who are Irish forming the notion of leader and how leader grew, and the fact that it was based on those principles that Irish people have held so dearly, our sense of community. And even though I have in recent years, as Maura will know, moved from living in County Meath, which is my county of birth, even though I'm from a migrant family from the west of Ireland in the Land Commission, to County Kildare. And I'm amazed myself how hard I find the move across the border, the change in colours from the green and gold to the white of Kildare. So sense of place is hugely important to us. And Brendan O'Keefe put it so well in the workshop that I was in, because he brought us back to that leader is an approach. It is a philosophy. It is a way of working. It is not just about projects. And I think leader is a very interesting name, because while we all know it stands for, it's an acronym for a number of French words, but leader to me is a person. It's a leader in a community. And if we build leaders, I'm in the education sector, many of us here in education, if we build leaders, then our communities are in safe hands. And that's what's really interesting. I thought it was interesting as well that Mark referred to Commons and Kane in 1994, who identified that pre-existing structures of inequality had not been addressed early in leader. And then Terry went on to talk about the changes, and Doreen talked about the changes, and how, in a sense, we need to keep that sense of building communities, animation, and continuity. And if we build people and continue to build people, there's a danger that the projects and the specialists will overtake the people who are head, neck, and heels, like Mary talked about in Caltra, involved in their community. And that's the one thing that struck me. Yes, I'm impressed by the project. Yes, I'm impressed by the innovation, but I still don't know how much the communities have grown over time. And I would love to know whether communities are now stronger across Ireland as a result of leader, or they're not, whereas it's a small number of people pushing particular projects. That's the thing that struck me.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and it goes back, I suppose, to if one raised the question of the evaluation of leader and how you look at what the added value actually is, and how you, and what that can be, and how you tease that out. And so many of us know it intuitively, but
it's relatively easy to look at budgets. It's relatively easy to look at projects. But what happened with the people, and particularly the connectedness of those communities, those people that made that team that Maura was so excited about? What happens in the dynamics of that team? What do those people remember about that experience, and how you tie that to your local community? And we would have talked, Mary Shaughnessy and myself, around our BSc in Rural Development, which was a distance learning program, about not educating people out of their communities, but rather bringing education into the communities.
Great. I'm going to move on. Let's move to Ashley. You'll bring a different perspective here, but it's basically the same question. What's leader done that's important for you, that's changed things for you in looking ahead?
Yeah, I think for me, the power behind this conference is unbelievable, and I think somehow that in itself is a testament to the future of leader, that there are so many people in communities, in the local action groups, that are absolutely, this program is something that is in our everyday vernacular. Everybody knows what leader is, and if that is, I suppose, one impact of it, it's not a program that has come and gone. It's kind of an institution, I think, in rural development in Ireland. And I think some of the issues that Michael highlighted there, we kind of, in some ways with leader, we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. We need to capture this kind of how these communities rise up, and the local football team empowers everybody when they win. But then we kind of come to this issue of bureaucracy, and if we try to measure these things, we almost stagnate them in some ways. So it's just, there's so many challenges. I think there's a middle ground somewhere. If we'll ever find it, I don't know, but that's kind of that's an aside. But I think in terms of leader and the achievement, I'm working at the moment on ruralisation, and it's a Horizon 2020 project, and I'm a researcher fundamentally, but one thing that we've been looking at is this question of, resources in rural communities, and how one thing maybe leads to another, and where does it all start, if it starts in one place at all. But it's with the people, but it's also with, I think Mary's case study of the community centres said so much, that we need these physical places, and we need them to kind of be a catalyst for the drama group that instills confidence in the young people, or whoever it might be that gets involved. And I think that for me is kind of a big achievement of leader. And I think Anne Cassidy said it as well in the social inclusion breakout group, that in the SciCap program, it can support training, and the physical, I suppose, spaces to hold those training workshops are not part of the program. So all of these different elements come together, and I suppose leader is one part and a crucial part. So that's kind of my take on the big question.
And interesting, what I'm picking up from what you're saying, from what Michael had said, you've both mentioned a string of names. This person, that person, so-and-so's done this, so-and-so's done that, so-and-so is represents this. And I'm looking at the comments that are coming in the chat as well. And I've just seen Winford James from Wales is coming. I haven't seen Winford for 20 years, I don't think. But you know, so there's a community around Leader and around the folk that are involved. And it's not unique to Ireland, and it's not unique to Scotland, and it's not unique to Brussels, to Belgium, or wherever. Tell me, Brian, I mean, you had a particular interest in economic innovation and business. What stood out for you? I mean, I know you've got a particular interest in young people as well, but from your perspective, what would you reflect on here?
Yeah, sure, John. I suppose I think the first thing I'll mention is you went first with Michael, and you mentioned the 30 years, and I'm quite conscious that I happen to be the same age as Leader, and it seems to have achieved a lot more than me for this country in the 30 years. So it's put a lot of pressure. But I suppose it's important to kind of echo what both Aisling and Michael have said, because Leader's biggest achievement, maybe, obviously, the innovation side of it, and you mentioned kind of some of my work around innovation and business innovation, and that's really important because innovation can be such a broad stroke. It can define anything, and there was reference earlier to, I believe, a funeral parlour was considered innovation in a particular context. So it's important that while innovation is happening, it's placed within the context, and that's what Leader has done. It's placed the innovation in that local context. But the other thing, I suppose, going back to what Aisling and Michael mentioned, was the groups and the sustained involvement of these people across the years. So a lot of people you may have noticed today, I definitely noticed, referenced, oh, I remember when it started. And the thing is that those people are still here, which shows this sustained dedication. So I suppose it's maybe an achievement of Leader, and it's also an achievement of the groups as well, isn't it? That the fact that while there was reference to some negative or realistic approaches around administration being an issue, people still remained. There's no one here that said, yeah, it was such an issue, I left. I think we've become maybe experts in that, in weaving our way around the administration, given the many positive stories we've had. So I suppose, yeah, I think for me, the achievement and the positivity would be the fact that we've retained so many different groups and people. The important thing then, John, I suppose, is what you mentioned around maybe my area as well, would be youth and rural youth. And what's important that going forward is that in the 60 years of Leader Conference, that we have people that said, well, after that conference, I got involved and rural youth were involved, so that we constantly have generational renewing happening within these groups, so that we're not stagnating, or we're not saying this particular leader or champion left and we were stuck. That we're bringing in new champions all the time is really important.
So if I was to ask you if what your greatest wish would be, your big aspiration for Leader in the future, would that be that whole issue of the young, of keeping them involved, keeping them mobilized, keeping them motivated? Definitely,
yeah. It'd be a very big wish of mine that Leader retains rural youth. And I suppose, again, in two ways. One, that through young people being involved with groups and coming in, and that groups kind of create an environment that's conducive to involvement of different age groups and different minority groups. And Aisling Dolan, I know, mentioned in the chat earlier on as well around examples of involving youth. And I believe there has been examples sent into the group chat. I haven't been able to look at them yet. But the important thing there is that if we do retain the youth, we are sustaining world economies, we're sustaining social fabric as well. So all of these different things are kind of your dream for Leader, that's what will happen going forward, that youth will be retained. And then as well, Shane mentioned the likes of smart villages going forward being a key theme. That's something very important. So in order for for rural youth to be sustained, they need reasons to stay in rural areas, and things like smart villages, bringing broadband, for example, will be a way in which people can retain themselves, and the groups can retain their rural youth as well.
And to me, it's fascinating. I've got two young girls. My daughters are 23 and 20. Not so young now, I dare say, but they both still come back here to the village, and they interestingly still network with all their friends, so farming families, local people here, and have found new ways of doing that by through new technologies and so on. So there's an interesting change in the dynamic of that grouping of young people. I mean, our village hall here has satellite broadband, which just is wonderful for what they can do. And you know, you don't need a DJ anymore. You just stream it straight in, you know, and the party happens. Actually, parties. You have had a party or two in the past with young people, I'm sure, but I'm digressing. What would your big wish, your forward aspiration be yourself, and for your group of younger people?
Sorry, Aisling.
Oh, sorry. No, Michael, go ahead.
After you, please.
I was speaking to Aisling first, please.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry.
I think it's a challenging one as well, because I think for young people sometimes they have a strong aspiration to leave, but they have a strong aspiration to come back. So they're kind of, I suppose, going to urban areas for education or for their first kind of career rung on the career ladder. So I think it's but it's also about some young people want to stay in rural areas, and some young people, is it about helping them to, you know, live in both worlds to some extent? That, you know, we have experienced how well remote working can operate in all our lives, and is there, I suppose, a space there for education to become something that we can capture these opportunities for young people who maybe are more inclined to stay local, but also the ones who want to leave and may come back later, that there's, I suppose, a number of routes for young people to remain connected and reconnect to rural places. But again, it's about those opportunities, and what will those opportunities be? And I suppose when we look to the future, we have to kind of align ourselves to how can the rural economy be part of this kind of new green revolution that we all need to engage in. And I think Leader has very much engaged with that, and I guess it's about all of the aspects of Leader trying to tap into that, either through the strong environmentally focused projects or the social inclusion projects that maybe have some kind of even a creative artist focus that helps people to engage in social inclusion, but become engaged in the wider green agenda. That's a big ask, but yeah.
Really interesting off the back of COP26, that you know, and perhaps influencing some people's thinking a little, but I mean, we saw the classic case of young people really playing a leading and actually quite an assertive and demanding role in some cases, which I think is, of course, the right. Michael, so I'm going to bring us back to our lack of youth in ourselves, but you've a great experience of working with young people over many years. What would you reflect on yourself if we could be looking for one big aspiration for the youth? Are there examples you've seen? Are there things that have worked in working with Leader and young people that you think we could transfer ahead?
The big question I have, I personally am a product of the influence of a rural youth organization. I was very shy until I became involved in Macra na Ferma, the Young Farmers Organization. And that literally changed me. And I would refer it to it more in terms of the seminal impact on my life course and my education than even school was or university was. It was huge in my life, absolutely huge. So I think we are looking at rural development, but we could equally have a conference like this on the lessons from the youth organizations. They know how to grow youth involvement and based in community level, like fabulous organizations like Feroica and that we have. So we have a huge history of this in Ireland. And it was really interesting. I remember actually being at a LAG meeting, colleagues, and a discussion, because the notion of innovation within LEADER meant that a lot of the organizations that were already doing great work couldn't actually get funded because they weren't doing something that was seen as being innovative, because they had been doing it for a long period. So they became discriminated on. They were discriminated against because they weren't doing something that was deemed to be innovative. And I keep raising the question, this 48, is it 48 pages we're at now in terms of the forum? You know, why is that required? What is it saying to communities? It's saying a lot of implicit things about trusting, about understanding and all that, you know, those things. So I think the involvement of youth, we know how that works if we talk to the organizations and groups that have been doing it for years. It is not rocket science.
It's streaming science these days rather than rockets. Yeah. But to me, fascinating that you're bringing it back to the way people are and how they demand and how they expect things can be done and how we can do that. And I can think of examples in my own past of working with LEADER. We've run LEADER youth subgroups, all kinds of things, but people still run into the same challenges, but we've still got that energy and that desire to move ahead. I suppose if we could make one big change with LEADER, and I'll tie it specifically to LEADER rather than to the wider aspirations.
Increase credit limit.
One thing we could do to change it over the next program,
yes,
over this coming period. What would it be? Michael, I'm going to leave you till last because you've got a lot of perspective on this. So we'll start at the beginning with Brian. What's your wish? What would you really like to see change or strengthen?
Yeah, it's important. I know that there has been a lot of reference to bureaucracy and form filling, but in the interest of expanding the conversation, I might give another idea, I suppose, if that's all right, not to discard what everyone has been referring to, but maybe a change could be around the governance ecosystem, or the fact that LEADER, sometimes it's viewed as a silo on its own, but often through my experience with the local authorities, I've found that often LEADER funding can be one aspect of a project, and it's important for us to know that it's part of a wider rural development ecosystem. So maybe instead of people viewing it in a silo, that going forward we see it as, okay, LEADER can do X or Y, and then from there I'm going to build on that. And we had an example of that kind of live nearly today happening. Mary Clark referenced the need for broadband, and within a few seconds of her mentioning that, Anne Cassidy from GRD had said in the group, once you have that part of the project complete, we're willing to get on board and get involved with digital skills training. So I think talking about LEADER as part of a wider suite of rural development initiatives or part of an ecosystem, and linking that better. And the other thing would be, I think someone mentioned earlier on as well, was horizontal governance or vertical governance, linking the different levels and making sure that we do have that bottom-up feel to our LEADER projects, but also that at governance levels we're linked as well. And I think as well, was it, I can't remember who mentioned it, but the fact that, I think it was Doreen, said that, you know, the relationships did flourish over the years between LEADER groups and different governance levels as well. So I think for me, yeah, it's building of that ecosystem and recognizing it and making sure that everyone's aware that we're not in just one box.
Interesting. I mean, the thing that stretches me is this enabling environment to help to cultivate that kind of involvement and make it possible. And that, to me, is almost the antidote of the top down, of the bureaucratic, and helping people navigate that. And I think it was interesting. I mean, Mark spoke about, you know, those ways of providing places where people could do those activities and develop their approaches. Actually, yourself. So where? So I just saw Ryan Howard agreeing with you in the chat. So same question for yourself. Taking that forward perspective.
I think, like, similar to how Brian started, I think the answer that comes to mind first is the issue of the paperwork, the bureaucracy, but I think we've probably reflected enough on that. But from what Iona said, it seems like there is an opportunity at the moment, that there's more flexibility within the next programme, and we're in a transition period, and perhaps there is room to reflect again on the stages, the many stages of the application process and the many layers involved, and if there's any room for simplification, seeing as we are in a mid-period. I think if any layer could be simplified, it would be a benefit. But that point has been well made. And I think coming back to something we discussed, a number of speakers, Mark Shucksmith referred to this, the seven principles of leader, and so did Iona from the Commission. And I think the cooperation principle, it's something that I know, like, formally there are cooperation projects, but I wonder if there's probably a space for more cooperation broadly, but more informally, that cooperation could help to maybe in some way help with the capacity building. In the social inclusion breakout group that I was involved in, there was a fantastic case study in Limerick, a community project that was providing childcare, and immediately the questions were, we're trying to do something in our community, can we talk to you, can you talk to us? So maybe more informally that cooperation principle is strengthened across places. So that would be something for the maybe future to think about.
Thanks for that, and thanks. Interesting to reflect on the cooperation between different elements of the approach, different groups of society, different organisations, and different sectors. Michael, I think we're coming to a close in the next minute or two. So if we could come to yourself.
Yeah, there's two things that has come out to me. Aoife, in her feedback from the Rural Environment Group, said that trust and capacity builds up slowly. If trust and capacity is allowed and enabled to build up, it will last a lifetime. In other words, it is sustainable. If it is not recognized, then it will move somewhere else. That capacity will move to somewhere else. So along with building trust and capacity, and having a leader needs to have the long-term belief that if you build people, people will build projects. And the second thing is that it takes a genius to simplify things. It doesn't take a genius to complicate them. So we need to simplify, make it simple. And if you're going to build trust, then you must trust people, that you don't need so many requirements that makes it bureaucratic and complicated. Build trust and then allow trust to work would be my wish.
Okay, thank you for that very much, Michael. And indeed, that I think is a watchword for very many people in the leader community, is this whole issue of trust. And then the system works, then the parts fit, then things can be enabled. And trust is a key enabling characteristic there. The other word I'll leave you with, I think the final word for me, we keep coming back to it. We talked about the acronym, about leader, and indeed that French acronym, which is about links between actions for the development of the rural community. And it is that whole business of links. I come back to it again and again and again, but the more we do that, the better that works, the more we'll achieve.